Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Kings and Generals podcast, episode 4, I believe. And today we'll be talking about the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, everybody's favorite little card game. I'm King Cole,
I am General Blue.
and today is Yu-Gi-Oh! Day. Woo! Yeah, we're going to be talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Today because there's just a dry patch between manga chapters, and I figured people don't want to hear me talk about Dragon Ball Heroes. So, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a strange game because I think when it came out, it was vastly different to other card games at the time. And I think like the dominant card game was probably Magic the Gathering, and that game is still really big. And a lot of people will play that game still. Because it's like Magic. No, so Magic, I'm gonna get this out the way. Magic is I think is like the template game for a lot of card games. You know, it has a resource through mana. Every creatures have a resource cost to be played. And a lot of people like that. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is different though. You can play any card. You can play most of your cards for free with no resource. Like normal summoning Celtic Guardian, just a normal level 4, can be done once a turn freely. And that's a pretty interesting mechanic. And what's also interesting is the spell cards and trap cards that also don't have a resource. They do have activation requirements sometimes. Like you can't just play Monster Reborn if you don't have anything in your graveyard to be summoned. Stuff like that. But I've noticed with how simple the Yu-Gi-Oh! Rules are, there's like a lot of misconceptions about how the game is played, especially in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot of people get very confused on how you play Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think that is for how fast the game can change, how fast the game has changed over the years. Like, if you look at the Legend of Blue Eye set and compare it to, let's say, 5Ds, where there's a new extra deck mechanic, I know there's people who would get pretty confused pretty quickly about it. And 5Ds came out, 2010?
I think in Japan, 2008 maybe even.
Yeah. The formats, so there's been a lot of formats in Yu-Gi-Oh! And the one that I think I hear most commonly online has to be people talking about GOAT format. And a friend of mine told me that he tried telling me GOAT format was a format where everybody played things like Scapegoat and, as he called, old school cards. And then he would list off things like Dark Arm Dragon, Chaos Emperor Dragon, and he claimed that they mostly came from the first 2 sets. But if I'm correct, Dark Arm Dragon didn't come out in the first sets. It came out much later. Came out closer to GX.
He must have confused GOAT for Teledad then, because I think Teledad was the one where Dark Arm Dragon was like the king.
Yeah, I remember Teledad format, and I actually remember being pretty annoyed at that format because it was I wasn't actively playing, but because I was pretty young during that. My dad had friends who did, and they, as a kid, I had maybe like Structure Deck Yugi or Structure Deck Kaiba mashed into this amalgamation of cards that I played. But I do remember getting my shit pressed in by like one of my dad's friends with Teledad, and it was like, ouch, my butthole. But people, I don't know what it is with GOAT format in particular, but a lot of people look at it as like this holy day of Yu-Gi-Oh! It was like the holy grail. This is the golden age of the game. And I think that's a sentiment I disagree with on a pretty big level.
Me personally, so I was very young when Yu-Gi-Oh! Was coming out, and there wasn't really any kind of opportunity to play much with people in my area, aside from maybe 1 or 2 people in the school. But even then, our schools kind of discouraged trading cards because they thought they were taking away focus. So I was really only playing with my older brother, and we were not using meta strategies to any large extent. We had a few sets from the GX era, and then we just kind of stopped for many years until I sort of got back into it with the creation of different apps like Dual Generations, Dual Links, the Steam game Legacy of the Duelist. And even though I can't say I have played physically in tournaments, I at least have a somewhat understanding of the metagame at this time.
Yeah, like okay, like back in the day for tournaments, I didn't start playing tournaments until I was much older, until I was about 15 or 16. Because my dad wasn't cool with me like going to as a kid going to a game store surrounded by a bunch of strangers to play a card game. And that's fine. I'm not gonna sit here and be like, God damn it, Dad. But tournaments for me, or I mean, just playing the game. My school had a pretty big player base in Texas, where I used to live. But it wasn't like Yu-Gi-Oh. If you know what I mean. We were playing it like Duelist Kingdom because we thought that was the rules, and we just never read the rule book. But I think there are people who like look at how Duelist Kingdom is played, or like how it's played in the anime, and they like take it seriously. And I was like, what? No way. The game's not played like that at all.
Yeah, a major problem that Duelist Kingdom had was just because they weren't really sure how the card game was going to work in its entirety when they were writing the original manga. It was done more for cinematic purposes and not really creating a strategy game. If you actually do have any of the old Duelist manga, you might notice some weird inconsistencies, like, for example, Celtic Guardian being a level 6 monster and stars relating more to rarity, I think is how it worked. Which, I do want to preface this conversation by saying, we're only going to be looking at the anime to some extent on giving examples of, like, how that might have misinformed people, because it's more based around the game itself rather than, like, what the shows do. And it's interesting, though, because Duelist Kingdom did try to make some tutorial duels, as I like to call them. Like, the first time we meet Bakura, and he does that thing where he traps everybody's soul into, like, their favorite cards, that was really just a way of, I guess, incorporating his debut in the manga with the D&D style mechanic, but that was also halfway a tutorial on flip effect monsters, because we saw Magician of Faith, Maneater Bug, Morphing Jar, and then immediately after that, Kaiba lands on the island. He uses polymerization to get out Rabbit Horseman, the Battle Ox Horseman fusion, and absolutely obliterates 90% of Joey's deck. So the anime tries to teach you the rules, but they also still make up their own thing as time goes on as well, which can cause further confusion.
Yeah, that in itself is true to I would say a smaller extent, just because like the anime, it's all right, but later seasons of the anime I haven't even watched. I've never watched anything past probably 5Ds. I watched a little bit of Zexal, but I was like, I was Yu-Gi-Oh! As an anime, like the cartoon and all, was lost on me. I still watch, the classic one for nostalgia, but it's definitely like, because I play, as someone who plays the most modern update of the game right now, time of recording, whatever's out is out. It's like so wild to see how slow and surprisingly. So one thing a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players complain about is interaction. They try saying like, new Yu-Gi-Oh is not interactive enough, and I think that term is being misused, because a very popular card right now is Ash Blossom, that level 3 hand trap. That if you, let's say you activate Foolish Burial, as you're searching your deck or about to send something from deck to grave, I can use her from my hand and negate the effect. People say that's removing interaction, but the thing is that Ash Blossom requires your opponent to play a card, and to me, isn't that the point of interacting right there? Yes, you're negating their card effect, but for you to activate your card at all, they have to play the game. Like that, it's just a dead card in your hand if they don't play a card that triggers your effect.
Hand traps and the level of interactivity are something that we could probably go on for a while about, and I know that a lot of people say Yu-Gi-Oh! People try to make it into a one-player game, and maybe to some extent that's technically the easiest way to win, is if you don't let your opponent do anything, but actually doing that is a lot easier said than done.
Especially, like, I do know there are some formats from years ago that were pretty bad with like 5 Omni Negator boards. But the game definitely has enough responses now where I don't think that's a problem anymore. Like Dark Ruler No More is just one of the best out cards you could ever run. If I were to summon like the new Stardust support that came out for that deck I just, but if I were to summon like every variant of the Stardust Dragon that all have different negates, and you just play Dark Ruler No More, you would out my board. Granted, you can't. My life points can't be reduced to 0 that turn because of the card's restriction, but it's a good way to bop your opponent on the nose if they want to completely overcommit a board. Cards like, hold on, I got a few of them lying around here. Skullmeister. I can just look this up on the EDO Pro. Skullmeister, Ash Blossom. I know Effect Veiler's not played too heavily anymore. There's one that's really popular right now. Droll and Lockbird is another very popular hand trap. Because it, stuff like that. And Cold by the Grave actually got limited. Oof. They're like generic cards that most decks can run to have a response to your opponent, like just spamming their board. Because something in earlier formats of Yu-Gi-Oh, even though the game was, for each format, the game is slightly slower, there's definitely an air of, to me personally, especially when I was a kid, like, yeah, you can run trap cards all you want, but if your opponent just runs a lot of trap removal, those cards in themselves can be negated pretty quickly. Like, if you have, what's an example? Like, if you just have, let's say, Mirror Force, because, your opponent's playing an OTK deck or something, and they just MST it away before you have a chance to defend yourself with it, you're pretty much just sitting there watching them solitaire till they win. And that I believe that happens a lot more in the older formats than people like to remember.
There's definitely a high volume of stalling, even in older formats, because, over the past few months, I was just kind of experimenting with different Yugi Kaiba format and Goat format decks just to kind of see how, since I wasn't exactly skilled as a kid, trying to see how they work nowadays. And there's definitely points where you feel like you can't do anything if your opponent has a solution to your problem. I think that they try to make cards that balance this out and work around it, but they're just a little bit off from where they should be. Like, this is a card my brother liked to use, and I think it's an interesting option. Even nowadays, it would technically work, but it's got a few restrictions to it. So there's a trap card called Judgment of Anubis. I think it was used in the show 2 or 3 times. Basically, somebody plays a spell card that would destroy something in your back row. You activate that, discard a card. Not only do you negate it, but your opponent takes... you can destroy a monster on your opponent's side of the field, and they take damage equal to its attack points. So that's like Magic Jammer plus Ring of Destruction. But the problem is, it's only spell cards that set it off. If it had also been trap cards, like if it even worked on freaking Dust Tornado, everybody would use that in GOAT format. I'm completely sure of it. But nowadays, there's so many... Just because of how people try to destroy your back row before they even summon a single monster themselves, and just because of how restricting it can be on what really triggers it, it isn't used at all. And that's a major difference with what you see.
Yeah, so I've been playing a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! The past 2 weeks with my brother on EDO, just because it's easier for us to play online than dig up all our cards and play. And we do own a decent portion of the actual decks we play. But he's been playing the new Dark Magicians. Dark Magicians got some new support, and you can test it out on EDO pretty early before it comes out. One thing that he complains about, and I do agree with him, there are certain boss monster cards that are just a little too strong. Like Dragoon of Red Eyes is a really popular card right now. And that card is dummy strong. It is. I am so sick of seeing it in my online matches. And I'm so sick of seeing him play it. But people point out that card and, card like that and say it's like an example of how bad Yu-Gi-Oh's become. But I think it's the way it's facilitated with things that aren't intended, like the Predaplant Anaconda card that basically makes you pay 2,000 life points, send Red Eyes Fusion from your deck, send Dark Magician and Red Eyes Black Dragon from your deck to summon the Dragoon. more problematic itself than the actual card Dragoon. Because, hypothetically, you could just have Solemn Warning down. Granted, you're not always going to have that, but it's like a card from a different archetype that's aiding every deck to summon one powerful card. I think, with a ban or a limit or just a errata can change that, compared to people saying that every game ends in one turn and every deck's an FTK. And I see that a lot too. I don't think, if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's ever been like a pure FTK format for Yu-Gi-Oh! In any regard. I think there's definitely been some popular FTK decks back in the day, like Blaze Fenix FTK. I remember hearing about that. I remember hearing about some large step Executor FTK. But I don't think there's ever been an official tournament format where FTK's dominated in any regard.
Frogs won a Worlds tournament once, but that was like the one exception.
Oh, damn. I fucking forgot those pieces of shit exist. I hear Totally Awesome crawling at me now.
No, Toad wasn't even part of that. It was Substitute or whatever it was. They just spam into Mass Driver for eternity.
Substitute, the card that has been errata to being pointless.
Yeah, so
but
the OG's never coming back in that sense.
Let's be thankful. I feel like a lot of the erratas and bannings that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has done throughout the years with its cards, I would say are pretty justified. Like, I don't think you'll ever see Blue Eyes White Dragon banned in any regard, but Dragoon of Red Eyes got banned in the OCG format, right? And that's a dark magician. It's a dark magician card in quotes. But it being banned, I think, is pretty justified over there because they do have a different ban list. So that's fine. Like cards that are just really toxic for the game that are limited or banned I feel like are always in the realm of like they deserve their limit. Like Foolish Burial, 1-for-1, Reinforcements of the Army, Monster Reborn, TG Hyper Librarian. That's another card. Like all of those are perfectly fine at 1. Because at some point, they were all at 3 at some point, and if you just think about the format back then when those are at 3, it's like, yeah, that was really problematic to deal with. Don't want to do that again. Excuse me. And other cards that are mostly limited, let me scroll through my deck lists here and see if I have any more. Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon is the only limited card I have in my Blue Eyes. I believe Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon was limited at points. But again, those were cards that were so powerful that I think any deck that could facilitate them did to extend their plays even further past the intended use of the card. And I think Konami, for the balance of Yu-Gi-Oh!, does a decent enough job. Because it's definitely like I said, people still romanticize GOAT format, or what I call caveman Yu-Gi-Oh!, where it's just set a card, normal a beater, pass, set a card, normal a beater, pass, and that's not really great interaction, like I was saying earlier. Because if we're just both normal summoning monsters in our faces till one of us just gets the bigger monster, I feel that's a very uninteresting way to play the game.
Definitely makes the game go on for eternity, because you can just stall with defense monsters forever if you can't find another solution. I shouldn't say forever, but you can stall for a pretty long time.
Yeah, stall has always been a thing in Yu-Gi-Oh! But then again, every game there's a way to stall. I don't think stalling is necessarily a bad thing, because there are a lot of decks that can do the dreaded, oh my gosh, they OTK'd me turn 2, this game is so broken. But it doesn't happen to me very often online. And the main decks I play are Skull Servants, Blue Eyes, Dark Magician, and Synchrons right now. I'm not playing anything in the meta, because again, I play what I play online is cards I own realistically. You know, I'm not gonna play like a $700 world champion net deck online and beat someone on it. But then again, that's just me. My brother does play Drytrons, and I know they're really good right now. And people, one of my friends actually pointed to Drytrons, basically saying that they're everything that's wrong with the game. That they have like one card runs the whole engine, and then they get things like Cyber Angel Ben 10 ban because the entire deck should just be limited. And it's like, no, I feel like the older the older the Yu-Gi-Oh player, the more set in their ways they are for certain formats. 1, 2, 3, let's go. Like, I think do you remember the Shadal format where like Cleafort Shadals existed?
I don't really have experience playing there, but I remember hearing plenty of horror stories about it.
Oh yeah, the horror stories were a little justified because I do. So I played out that is when I found a bigger friend group because a few years before that I moved from Texas to New York, and then I met more people who played Yu-Gi-Oh and a few people who actually played competitively, and that's when I started diving into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh. Now the Shadal format was a little weird for me because at the time I still had like the Zombie World deck that I just turned into a Dark Synchro deck. Like I turned into a glorified Dark Synchro. But I do remember having a lot of trouble outing, like, what's her name? Oh my goodness, I forgot her name. The one that really popular, El Shadal Construct, that's it. I remember that card and El Shadal Winda were really strong. And I think since then, let me just check this here. El Shadal. Okay, thanks, Yu-Gi-Oh Pro. Have the Shadal cards that I thought were limited been unlimited? Yes, they have. Cool. So Shadal Fusion. I remember El Shadal Fusion at one point was like at 1 because it would facilitate a board to where you can only like do mechanics once, like special summon once and stuff like that. And my one buddy who loved the Shadal deck was telling me about how these newer formats will never be as good as this format. And I think I hear people say that just because, like, the deck they were playing at the time was strong, and since the game has changed, they're not happy with it now.
That's probably true, but I mean, to some extent, I can't completely blame them because if you spend several hundred on a deck that can compete against what's currently out there, and then either the ban list or the next set just makes most of the cards you have completely unusable, yeah, I'd be pretty agitated too, not gonna lie.
Yeah, that happened with the Thunder Dragon deck I built. And I should have known prior that Thunder Dragons were going to get hit with a limit hammer, just because at the time that deck was really silly to play. It was a unbelievably strong deck, and it was just like, Jesus Christ. But I don't think one deck being strong should be representative of how the entire game is played. Because there's a lot of decks that aren't meta, that have never been meta, but that play competently enough. And with all the new cards that are out that are generic support, all like Link Monsters, XYs, the hand traps, more better spell and trap card support that is coming in the game for years. I feel like we're at a point where older, weaker decks can at least play more efficiently for themselves. Even if they're not going to be meta, it's better than playing a brick, drawing into a deck that bricks, most of the time and can kind of play. And that was a big thing back then, too. I think older Yu-Gi-Oh! Definitely had a problem with most you would draw into a hand that can kind of play, where newer Yu-Gi-Oh! Definitely has a lot of ways to extend your combos now. And I personally think that's a significantly better game state than just watching two people stare at each other.
I think it can definitely help, but to some extent, I feel like the way in which any kind of main deck can function was largely based around the staple cards they have. Like, at the very beginning, I guess we had, I don't know, Pot of Greed and Monster Reborn. When Goat format started, you had Magician of Faith, Graceful Charity, Sangan, everyone was using those. Teledad was mostly people using the Destiny heroes and their search cards to make everything work. And now you have, like, the hand traps, the main links. So, I mean, most of the time, you'll probably see, like, 5 to 10 cards repeated in pretty much every deck. It's just the rest that's more... that has a difference and is based around their primary method of play.
That's definitely true. I did test around with Sky Strikers for a while, and that deck was really flexible. It was I do remember it being, I think it was meta at one point though. I don't remember too well though, because at that time I was working. God damn it, my computer just crashed. Oh well. Thank goodness I'm on my phone for this call. But it's like, I was talking to another friend who has currently stopped playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Due to COVID, actually, due to lack of events around our town, lack of people wanting to go out and play because of all these restrictions, and that's fine. But when I asked him what's one thing that he gets annoyed with throughout modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And he said for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! He's kind of sick of like decks that only require one card to basically facilitate themselves into a full combo, where some weaker decks or older decks would require at least 2 to 3. And that, I think, that's a fine thing to complain about, because there are times where you can definitely play against certain decks, Sky Strikers being one of them, where you'll hit their Ray with like a negate or something, or you'll try to stop them, but then they just keep going anyways. And that, like, I understand that does suck, but again, those are very few decks compared to the large majority that's in the game currently.
I mean, I've heard a lot of jokes with just how the monsters, their cards that get hit on the ban list are just because they were made without any real idea of how quickly you could just turbo something out of the deck. Like, the main one people like to talk about now is Needle Fiber, and how Needle Fiber just caused, like, a good almost 10 different tuner monsters to get banned because people could start up these ridiculous combos because of it. And yeah, that's kinda true, I'm not gonna lie. But, I mean, I don't know, there have always been some really over-the-top and off-the-wall combos, and every environment had a dominant strategy. This just happens to be the one people are dealing with now.
Dude, Needle Fiber or Halcyon Fiberax, however the hell you say that monstrosity's name. That's a card I don't like, because it's a synchro monster disguised as a link monster. That's special someone's a tuner. But it's also just a good card. It's like, god damn it, why are you good? Why do you have to be a good card? I do remember when Lynx came out initially, I remember a lot of people saying that it was going to destroy the game because of how the monster zones worked. I'm going to actually go against the grain here. Before they reverted the Link rule to not affect the XZ Fusion Synchro monsters, they do affect Pendulums from the extra deck and Link monsters themselves. I actually think the Link rule was actually better for the game, because it required you to actually, utilize a new mechanic, God forbid, and 2, you had to play a little smarter. You couldn't just vomit your board of like all your synchro monsters or all your exit monsters and pass. You had to actually strategically climb into a bigger, better board. And I think a lot of people didn't like that because it hindered them.
So here's my thought on Link Monsters, and even though I didn't really play that competitively at this point, that was around the time I started getting back in the game. I think that if the idea had just been, that Link monsters were only for the purposes of climbing. Like, the idea is extra deck monsters are so powerful, you need like a mid-range monster to kind of get them out and give them an opportunity to be present on the board. That would be an interesting enough idea that would reasonably slow down the game, because the main goal would still be everybody trying to get out their big Xyz or Synchro or Fusion, just having more than one at a time. But when the format quickly started, it seemed like Link climbing was the best idea, because you had Firewall, you had the Boral Dragons that were all considered dominant monsters at that point in time. Firewall had a bunch of FTKs that weren't the best thought out, and obviously because of marketing and the fact they were trying to do Vrains, like give that cinematic value, they had to make sure that the Link monsters actually had power so they could have cinematic effect. But I mean, at the end of the day, is there really like a fundamental difference between a person who gets... If you get 3 monsters in your hand, you're able to summon them, and let's just say 2 of them are water, so you have a normal monster, no, I guess it would have to be 4 in this case. So you'd have like 2 regular effect monsters on the field, Xyz the 2 water monsters for Bahamut Shark, and then by that's effect you get Toad. Or if you just linked the 2 into, I don't know, Miss Starboy or some other Link 2 monster, then you get a Link, the Shark, and the Toad. I mean, that's not a huge difference right then and there. It can be somewhat limiting depending on what they're trying to do. I do think it's a good idea to have Link 1 monsters. Like, Link Haribo was one of the most played cards in the game because it's like a monster has an effect that renders it basically powerless afterwards, but now it's gone and you're not immediately in the weeds because it's still on your field. That's a good idea. I just don't know if it definitely forced people to build their extra deck in a much more restrictive but also creative way in order to work around these limitations, which did help quite a bit.
Because so I remember before when Lynx came out, I remember my mind instantly went to, because at the time I was still playing Blue Eyes White Dragons pretty hard, and I actually went to Level Leader to try to utilize these links with Link Haribo and stuff. Then Level Leader got banned, and I was like, alright. So I went back to Skull Servants of all things, just because they were a fun OTK deck, and they've since gotten a bunch of support, like, oh my goodness. But Links, like, when they reverted the Link rule, I was a little salty about it, just because, like, I was kind of like, oh, come on. I was starting to get the groove of, like, being able to play with these new monsters and utilize them as best I can. Because, like, another thing, too, is, like, I think pendulums were, like, for a lot of people, the straw that broke the camel's back on the game. My brother did play a pendulum deck. I did not play a pendulum deck. I was playing Dark... Again, I was playing a Dark Synchro deck at the time. Just out of habit. And I remember when he started playing Perform Pals. And I think... For me, Perform Pals is definitely where I saw a lot of people drop the game and say it was like this unplayable mess of a game without actually playing through the format. Because Perform Pals did get emergency bans, which I think is, hilarious to me. Because it's just like, haha. But at the time, it definitely wasn't the best board state, game state, because pendulums were, I think, really difficult to balance out. They've been balanced since, but I think they're still a balancing nightmare.
Yeah, I have not really played in the pendulum era, but from what I understand, everyone said that either you played pendulums or you lost, basically.
I don't remember if that's true, because I did win a few games here and there. I think it's just, like, the new mechanic. I think that was probably one of the strongest mechanics they ever released at the time, was just unchanged pendulums. Because the pendulum monsters, when destroyed from the field, go to the extra deck,
And then if you have like let's say you have a scale 1 and a scale 8, everything between 1 and 8 can be special summoned en masse, as long as they're in the pendulum zones. And that was before the pendulum zones were moved to the what was it called? Moved to the spell and trap zone. So I definitely remember that being a big complaint with a lot of people at the time. And there are people who still complain about pendulums. Like I guess they just want the entire mechanic removed. And one thing I don't think Yu-Gi-Oh's ever going to do is remove a mechanic.
No, they never will.
Let alone what's it called? Let alone revert the game into a weaker state or release weaker cards. Because, like I said, there's been more cards printed over the years that are either for archetypes that don't get C play a lot. Like, I'm pretty sure you've heard of the legacy support. The main decks probably being Blue Eyes, Dark Magician, and Red Eyes. I think Relinquish got some. I know Ancient Gears got a lot of support throughout the years. What were some more favorite? Heroes have never stopped getting support in any regard. They will always be supported. Insects recently have gotten support too, and I think that's actually pretty cool. Because I think the only main insect deck ever was like Insectors, and then after a while we saw Digital Bugs as an archetype, but that archetype didn't go anywhere. And then what I think one of the coolest moves they ever did was they printed support for Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth. And I hope they do more of like that nostalgia pandering with newer cards for the older archetypes, just to show people that they still care.
I mean, it wouldn't be bad if we saw like Venoms or Phantom Beasts coming back in some good format, just because they decided to pump out more cards in that environment. It'd be a little more unique, and yeah, it could work out well.
Yeah, I think the same buddy I was talking to about his issue with the game is that he feels that this format, that modern Yu-Gi-Oh, has been more versatile with what you face. Granted, that doesn't automatically mean that that's going to be the highest level of meta. It just means that he's seen more people playing different decks compared to earlier formats where it was like the same two decks. And I think like the worst example definitely has to be Spellbook Prophecies at full power and then Dragon Rulers at full power. That format is probably my least favorite because it was just like those two decks all the time. I remember going to locals and there were people who had both decks, and it was like multiple people. It'd be like, a tournament of like 16, 20 people, and then like 13 of them are playing those two decks, and it's like, god damn.
As far as my experience goes with like what you see in a deck, well, I think that one thing that can really confuse people is just how there isn't really like a definite hierarchy. Like, you might know what's meta and what's not just based on what you see, but this is me just kind of going into the different summoning mechanics and how I think that might cause a bit of confusion. So, Link monsters, I mentioned earlier that if they were like a midpoint between main deck and extra deck monsters, that'd be something, because for the most part, you can make Link monsters out of basically anything, as long as, depending on what they specify. If they require a specific monster, you have to use that, but for a lot of them, just any combination of monsters is fine. Then Xyz monsters, they have to be monsters of the same level with each other. With Synchro monsters, their levels have to add up to a specific total, and at least one of them has to be a tuner. And then Fusion monsters are usually specific, or at least part of a specific archetype, and they also have to have a spell card jammed into that most of the time. And then the most restrictive is probably Ritual monsters, because they're in the main deck, so you have to have the Ritual card in your hand, then the Ritual spell, and something to offer up for that retribution. So you'd think that based on how restrictive they are, that should determine power level. Like, Link monsters should be the weakest on average because they're the easiest to bring out, and rituals and fusions should still technically be the strongest. But that's not inherently true. You do have very powerful ritual monsters and fusions in the game. Like, Dragoon is a very powerful fusion, and I know that over the years there have been powerful rituals like Gishki and Nekroz, but as it stands, Synchros, Xyz, and even Lynx are going to take over just because they're easy enough to bring out if you build the deck in a specific way.
True, I do remember there was this ritual archetype. It was like these peacock guys. They were like ritual spirit monsters. And the deck was fun to play, but it was definitely hindered by the fact it was a ritual archetype. Like, it was no Nekroz, and I remember Nekroz. They should be put back in the pit where they belong. But Nekroz were like a great example of one oversight can pretty much turn rituals into the most powerful card type in the game. And Nekroz are still pretty strong, but I think they have been reined in pretty hard, and I don't think any ritual archetype since then has ever reached the level of Necrons because of how strong they became over that full format. Ugh. Okay.
Definitely based around how long a deck is running for. That's, I think, one of the bigger issues with how they choose to rein it in. Like, they've pretty much been making Hero and Blackwing and Blue Eyes cards for as far back as they could, but I mean, there's really only been a handful of times that those were the top decks, and even when they were, it was either because they were like just starting out, or it was sort of a happy accident thing where their cards just happened to counter what was the most dominant at that time. So, I mean, as time passes, you are going to see some random cards make the top spots here and there. It's just what they're able to do consistently.
Yeah, like Blue Eyes, I remember Rank 10 Yu-Gi-Oh! Quoted, I'm quoting him here, he called the Blue Eyes Synchro Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon, he called that a format assassin because you can't summon you can't summon two monsters at the same time. And at that time that the Blue Eyes support came out, pendulums were getting really popular. They just so happened to be the most powerful card type, my bad. And that's why Blue Eyes won the Worlds. It wasn't like some evil, sinister plan by Konami. It's more along the lines of like, that's just how it happened.
Yeah, and that's why every so often you'll hear somebody using an old, obscure card that just randomly makes everything viable. Like, I mean, I guess there aren't too many examples from the previous game state, but every so often people will try something, and that's why most of the old spell cards have been banned for a very long time, because they know how pathetic easy they would be to cheese out with the way the game is now.
Yeah, like, I love me Pot of Greed, but I couldn't even begin to justify Pot of Greed coming back into the game, because that would be extremely problematic for the game, let alone just modern Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole, because it's a +1. And the way Yu-Gi-Oh! Is designed, and like, I remember someone tried saying like, oh, give it a once per duel errata. Yeah, but here's the thing. You only need it to go off once to win the game. Even in decks like the lower tier decks I play, I've been playing Sue ships lately. They're super low tier. It's like, oh, it'd be great in that. It's like, yeah, it'd also be great in Drytron. It'd also be great in Shadal and Cleafort and what is more, Orcus and World Chalice. It'd be great in Dark Magician and Red Eyes. It'd be great everywhere. It'd be in every deck, no question. And that's something that I think Konami has over the years not wanted. They've wanted decks to be built differently. Where in something like, Magic, the Commander format, every Commander deck runs Soul Ring, but the way Magic is played and the way its rules are, that's not a problem. For Yu-Gi-Oh, you wouldn't want to see Painful Choice. You wouldn't want to see Painful Choice, Pot of Greed, Change of Heart, or any of that in your in every single deck you play, because it would make the game really boring.
Yeah, I'm paraphrasing some comments I saw a while ago of people describing the difference between the games, so this may not be 100% factually correct, but the point still kind of stands. In the Pokemon card game, there are cards that just outright let you draw 2 or 3 cards, and not a lot of people even use those. In Magic, there are cards that might let you draw 2 or 3 with basically no restrictions, and everybody uses them. And in Yu-Gi-Oh!, one card that lets you just draw 2 cards, and another one, Graceful Charity, that lets you draw 3 and discard 2. They've both been banned for 15 years because they're too good.
Yeah, that's just because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a different game compared to other games. Because, like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Not having a resource to summon your blue eye, like, if you just have 2 monsters on the field, my bad. Blue Eyes White Dragon does require a resource, 2 tributes. If you were to add a resource element to Yu-Gi-Oh!, you would pretty much you would pretty much slow the game down to this unbelievable degree, where the game is kind of made around the fact that you don't need a resource to play it. And that's, for me, that's a great change of pace compared to other card games like Magic and Pokemon. You need energy. I know Pokemon, you need energy to attack, and Magic, you need mana to play any card. Like, with the exception of very few cards, you always need some type of mana to play your cards. And that's not a bad thing in Magic. Like, oh no, I need something to play this card. But in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's actually a lot of cards that do require some type of setup. Like ritual monsters, you need something to tribute and offer. Synchro monsters, you need a tuner. Exes, they have to be the same level. You can't just spam summon them. And there are people who think, like outsiders looking into the game, who think that's just how the game's played. And it makes you raise the question of how many people read the actual rulebook for Yu-Gi-Oh! Before playing the game.
So, that's interesting because I kind of feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! Tries to give themselves pseudo mana resources, but they never go all the way. Not necessarily for the biggest monsters, although I guess I can get into that in a moment, but like, pretty much any combo piece you have. Okay, back in the day, your biggest monsters required tribute summoning. That was pretty straightforward, but over the years, aside from very specific monsters, they've tried to get away from that and make it easier to cheese them out. But for getting out pretty much all the smaller monsters, usually they may say you have to discard a card, and you only have a limited number in your hand, you may be missing a combo piece. You may have to give up a certain amount of life points, which, yes, they're limited, but as long as you plan around it, you're not going to be in a bind for that. You may have to, even when the monster's already out, you may have to attribute a monster that's already on the field, or in the case of an Xyz monster, you detach one of its limited materials. Some monsters, they can't be on the field unless there's like a field spell or something, or in the case of hand traps, your opponent has to do something. So it's like, they try to rein in how you can spam the abilities, but they never go quite as far as other card games do. The closest they get to that is counters, because many archetypes, like, I know Old Aliens, Cloudians, and probably another bunch of archetypes I'm forgetting about, they use counters. But aside from very fringe cards that only really did that as part of a gimmick, like, say, Breaker, that they never really saw any kind of viable success, just because counters took a very long time to really set up and do something with, and if that's disrupted, then you're just completely out of luck. And that's the thing, because it's not an inherent part of the game, it's something only only a select bunch of cards can do, it's possible to disrupt that. And in fact, some decks, if they know what they're up against, it's very easy for them to disrupt that.
Yeah, that's true. And that's the thing. I don't mind a deck disrupting my plays. I'm not gonna sit here and grovel over the fact that, oh no, my plays were stopped. Like, God forbid the opponent plays the game with you. But it's definitely that goes back to the interaction that there is a lot more interaction in newer Yu-Gi-Oh throughout the years than people give it credit for. And I think I'll always attribute this to the idea that, like, people romanticize the older game, the older versions of the game, or like the anime stuff like that, and that's fine. You can have your preference, but don't. But I feel as if people do still unfairly criticize the newest style of the game just because it's not how they remember it.
Definitely from my perspective, it felt really weird to get back into it because just in general, the amount of options available and what really constituted good versus... like, what constituted a good play versus messing around, I wasn't entirely sure about. So it can take a long while to learn, and you do have to experiment quite a lot, whereas, at least back in the past, you kind of had a simple objective of have the most attack points, and then you were pretty much good to go outside of a few disruptions here and there. But, I don't know, as time passed, it wasn't just focusing on getting around the monsters, but how you got around them, because there's so many layers of protection, like battle protection, destruction protection, targeting protection. It's a whole lot to keep track of, and to be quite honest, if you aren't really sure what you're going up against and you plan for the completely wrong thing, you're probably going to get bodied. That is an unfortunate reality of the game. It's just a matter of what you're able to work with, and why you see the staple cards that you do see to get around that.
Yeah, having those staple cards, like Dark Ruler No More, has been the best response to Ash Blossom. Because there was a little bit of a time where Ash Blossom was really powerful, where hand traps were powerful. But now that, not Dark Ruler No More, Called by the Grave, my bad. Called by the Grave. Even though Called by the Grave is at 1, since it's a quick play spell, if I drop my Ash Blossom in response to your Foolish Burial, and then you respond with your Called by the Grave, it shows that all these cards, those 2 cards can only be activated in response to your opponent. So that it is player interaction. It's just not how people, I guess, how they define it themselves. And it's perfectly fine for people to like, GOAT format or Teledad format or like the beginning of Synchro format over other formats. But I think I've noticed with Yu-Gi-Oh! The most, it's definitely a game where people will make very blanket statements over, over the game compared to things like Magic and Pokemon or even Hearthstone. So I've seen people be way more fair on those games than how Yu-Gi-Oh! Is treated, and that's still gonna bug me for a while and it's gonna happen forever, as long as there's this wacky cartoon that basically misrepresents how the game is played. And I've heard newer Yu-Gi-Oh! Seasons have been playing with the real rules, 8,000 life points, and not using like made-up rules as the show's gone on. But I will say the show does also have, their decks are built in a very specific manner, where a lot of the cards in the show look stronger than they are because of how they theme the episode. And again, like you said, it makes it more theatrical. Like there are a lot of gimmicky cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I actually appreciate that a lot. I love cute gimmicky cards that, even if they don't work all the time, it's just fun to use. Like one of my favorites was Mahino Force, where you had to have like 5 monsters on the field, tribute them all to summon this 4,600 beater that wasn't very good. That stuff is filled to the brim in Yu-Gi-Oh with a lot of decks and cards, and I think that is really fun and is something that should stay in the game compared to every deck being a 1-card, 2-card combo meta deck. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Jesus. Well, that's the general point right there. Sorry.
No, you're good. And I mean, I definitely think like it's aggravating that the game slowed up to the point where basic original trap cards and a lot of normal spell cards can't really be used unless they have incredibly powerful effects. I kind of feel like they put it in this weird catch-22 situation where just because of how prevalent hand traps are, I feel like it's almost like we need a few more of them. Like, I'll be honest, I firmly believe that we should kind of follow what Japan does and have Max C back at least at 1 to sort of rein in how people can special summon, like, so many monsters on their first turn. And I wouldn't be surprised if we got some kind of, like, monster version of card destruction or hand destruction that can just immediately disrupt a combo very quickly because of how much prevalence people place right now on the first turn or two of the duel. Because, you know, if you summon up your best monster and they get hit by prominent hand trap, a lot of people just give up right then and there, and that does cause a realistic problem with the game, but I think that in general, there is a good balance that can be met. If a person's not trying to be 100% perfect, and both players are aware that they can be a little more entertained by being just a bit suboptimal, then yeah, the game is perfectly enjoyable. But I see so many people just immediately rage and quit if they get outed in one crucial moment at the very beginning, and I think that's probably the biggest issue.
You can say in response to that, you can say that you can easily say that the person should have played more cautiously or tried to play around the fact like I don't have the best knowledge of the card pool. Like, I can't remember every Yu-Gi-Oh card, but Droll, Walkbird, Ash Blossom, Ghost Ogre, Snow, I still see a lot. Same with Called by the Grave and Dark Ruler. So I do try to, especially when I'm playing online, I do try to not overcommit my entire first turn into something that's just going to get, especially if it gets outed, then it just means my deck is over and I lose.
Yeah, you don't want to play whack-a-mole.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people who play the game like that, where they expect, like, well, I have my setup, that means I win now. And then the opponent's just like, okay, and they pick up their scalpel and they start dissecting their field. Yeah. And the opponent just doesn't have anything in response because they, just assume their setup's unbreakable. And that was a problem back in earlier Yu-Gi-Oh! Where unbreakable boards were just unbreakable. That's why Wing Dragon Raw Spear Mode and the Kaiju monsters are probably some of your best responses, because you tribute the monsters at a cost, so the effect can't be responded to until after.
Yeah, those were a necessary evil in the game state, definitely.
I mean, I was like hardcore playing Kaijus because I absolutely loved this really stupid pseudo Godzilla theme. Granted, I will say, I now my newest variant of Skull Servants is a mix with the Eldritch card, and that's an engine a lot of people hate. And I remember one time I got up, I completely overcommitted this hand. I had like a 10k King up. I had Eldritch himself up with a Gustav Max and an Omega. And I was like, yeah, they'll never out this. And I immediately got spear moded, and I was like, good play.
Some people have told me a trick where, Nibiru, where you're supposed to, you put that on your opponent's field if they special summon 5 monsters in a turn. Some people say that their trick is, when their opponents start special summoning, you just count on your fingers, even if you don't have the card in your hand, just because that's going to get them to stop at 4 every time.
That is true, and I actually like Nibiru a lot, because there's been a few games where I side it out, and the opponent will vomit their unstoppable board, then I'll just Nibiru it, and it's like, nice, keep going. And I like cards like Nibiru and, what the fuck was it called? Max C, are great examples of slowing the game down while not slowing it down.
Yeah, I mean,
you can vomit your board, but don't complain if your opponent can now respond to you. And I think that's better than Caveman Yu-Gi-Oh! To me, that's just a more enjoyable state.
Yeah, like, I do feel if we have Max C back, they're just gonna stop at 1, maybe 2 special summons, because they're not gonna let you draw 7 cards before, just so they can get their own combo out. They're going to lose if they do that.
Oh yeah, so it's all coming together now.
Basically.
So I do play Magic Commander, like I said earlier, and now I know Magic's foreign to you, but there's one mechanic in Magic there are 2 mechanics in Magic that I fucking hate. The fact that there are cards that can do infinite combos, and there are cards that can make you infinite loop your turn. I hate that. I'm very glad that's not in Yu-Gi-Oh! And it never has been. And I hope that's something that never comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! Is turn looping. Because I feel like I know Arcana Force the World can do it, but if you get the second turn with Arcana Force the World, I think you earned it. By that point.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I'm not gonna break down the combos in Magic that allow people to go infinite or like infinitely loop their own turn, because it can be very lengthy sometimes, and since the game's foreign to you, there's no point of explaining it. It's just like, again, I'm just very glad that is not a present thing in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah, there's monsters like the World, they intentionally base everything around, like, basically Arcana Force can never be a good deck because they're scared of having the World FTK instantly. Whereas they could just ban the World if that happens, but they're probably not going to.
If someone ever does a World FTK on me, even if I have hand trap responses, I'd be more wowed by the sheer spectacle that they actually did that to me.
Yeah.
God, great. I'm gonna go to when locals eventually reopen, I'm gonna go there. There's gonna be a fucking dude who listens to this, shuffling his cards. He's like wearing a black trench coat. He's like, "Are you King Cold?" I'm like, "How'd you know?" General Blue sent me.
That'd be a spectacle, yeah. I don't know. I'll make sure you can counter the guy. You have whatever hand traps they can counter with. I feel like... I also think that this is a very minor thing, but from an outsider's perspective, and you can definitely say the same about Magic from what I've seen, but it's kind of weird to keep track of what card names... Like, card names definitely sound over the top, because one of the bigger hand traps now is, what, Infinite Impermanence? I'm pretty sure Infinite Impermanence was the diagnosis my granddad got in his erectile dysfunction test.
yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Okay, I will say Yu-Gi-Oh! has a bad habit of having these super grandiose names. Like, I'll just go over the Stardust Dragon extra deck in front of me right now. So we have Stardust Dragon. Okay, he's a Stardust Dragon. We have the Shooting Star Dragon. All right, I get it. The Majestic Star. Okay. Shooting Majestic Star Dragon. Whoa, we're getting a little fucking wonky here. Where's that Super King Mechanist Grand Quantum dude? I need to pull up all of his pronouns.
Oh no, you think that's bad? I mean, Red Eyes has it just as bad with how many of their monsters sound almost exactly the same. Yeah.
I'm playing a Red Eyes monster, yeah?
What's that?
What to do?
Say again?
I don't know. I'm playing a Red Eyes monster. Which one? It's the one with red eyes.
No, but I mean, they got like... Does they have Black Metal Dragon, Red Eyes Metal Dragon, Red Eyes Flare Metal Dragon, let's see, Red Eyes Archfiend of Lightning, Archfiend Black Skull Dragon, Meteor Dragon, Red Eyes Impact. That's another one here. They just got a lot, and it can be difficult to keep track of them if you're not, like, actively looking.
What was the last thing you said?
Meteor Dragon, Red Eyes Impact. Yes, that's actually a monster. And then the fusion with that is Meteor Black Comet Dragon.
Hang on.
Oh, am I cutting out? Huh.
Very badly, yeah. Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me? I can hear you.
The whatever you said about the Red Eyes Dragon, you're probably gonna have to go back and edit.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like it'd be good on my end. I'm hearing you okay, but I guess I'll listen to the playback. Yeah, could just be some technical difficulties. Or maybe it's because I held my phone too close to my face, and that affect the microphone. I don't know.
Stop having your phone rest directly on your mouth, bro.
Exactly.
Get off your McDonald's Wi-Fi, dude.
That'll happen, I'm sure. But no.
Yeah, but I
just
think
the jumble
overall,
of words in the Red Eyes monsters is nonsensical.
Yeah, I think overall though, with the game of Yu-Gi-Oh and just like things like it's anime and all this, I think it's fine. I think there are people who definitely get too passionate about hating the game instead of really sitting down and thinking about the game could do worse. The game has been in worse states, but two, I don't think people look back on how the game has improved itself over the years.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some minor changes that I think just make more realistic sense. I mean, it can depend, but because so many archetypes rely on field spells, now each player can have their own, whereas if it was just one field spell on the whole board, then it would just kind of be an Uno reverse situation back and forth. I mean, logically it makes sense that monsters with 0 attack points can't destroy each other because they don't really have any force. It can be a little confusing when explaining the rules to somebody, but it makes more logical sense. And then if the player who goes first still drew a card on their first turn, then that would absolutely break the game because of how many people value that one extra card.
Yeah, I think if you ever wanted, whoever's listening, if you ever wanted to get into Yu-Gi-Oh, I think your best bet would be to buy any starter deck that comes pre-shuffled, and then just play with the rulebook right next to you, because that's how I learned. Or play online, play on one of the online simulators, or the PS4 game, because the PS4 game actually, I forgot what it's called. Oh gosh, but it's a game my buddy plays on PS4.
That's a Legacy of the Duelist one, right?
Yeah. I know that's I know that has slower formats. I think it's mostly the anime stuff. I'm not too sure because I've only seen him play it.
Yeah,
but I think that.
They dumped that on Steam and Switch too, so there's good options for it.
All right, because you can do Duel Links too, because there's a lot of ways to learn Yu-Gi-Oh. I think getting into it really isn't that hard. It's just really dependent, and this is the truth for every card game that ever exists. It's going to be really dependent on who you play with, because there are people who can really suck the joy out of games. We all know people like that who are overly competitive, or they just care way too much about winning a card game or any game that can ruin it for you. But I don't think the stigma of Yu-Gi-Oh is something that people should hold accountable to the game or judge the game for, considering that stigma the game doesn't really live up to. And if it does, it's usually in a really niche, in this really niche circumstantial scenario that isn't gonna happen all the time.
Yeah, I think that as it stands, there are a lot of ways to get into the game. It will take a significant amount of time, but it can be done, and there are legacy formats to go back to on different servers. You can play Yugi Kaiba, you can play Goats, you can play Speed Duels. You'll find a way to enjoy it, regardless of how you want to do so. And some people may give you a hard time for not keeping up with what's modern, but just do what you feel most comfortable with.
Yeah, I know I was mostly complaining about people who refuse the modern version of the game for older formats, but they have the right to like the older formats, because there are still flaws with the modern version of the game, but the flaws that people complain about are usually, I think, unjustified or unfair. But excuse me, I think I might in a few days. You and I should try to get on Dueling Book and actually try that Yugi Kaiba format, because I have no idea what that means. Do you just play Yugi and Kaiba's deck?
Basically, it's the first real format we had from The only sets out were Legend of Blue Eyes, Starter Deck Yugi, and Starter Deck Kaiba. I'll send you the Yugi No-No video that goes over it, and yeah, you'll see how it works. It can be pretty slow and bricky, but you'll definitely see the idea behind it.
Okay, but if there's no pathetic cards in my deck, Kaiba, and hit me with an Exodia, I'm just gonna go home. Yeah, if I just figure out that you're just gonna that you just like actually send me the fucking Shadow Realm, I'm gonna be a little more than salty about that.
Nah, I don't think I'd be able to pull that one off.
But I think that will cover this general Yu-Gi-Oh rant. You know, I really wanted to get off my chest is the misconceptions people say about the game. And I think we covered that pretty well.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more chances to rant about it in the future.
Oh yeah, especially when I start going back to tournaments. Can't wait for that. If anyone ever wants to play the game, though, I'm going to seriously suggest either Dueling Books with a friend who's familiar or the EDO Pro Simulator. Those are great ways to play the game because they're online. You have access to every card, a lot of formats. And if there's just a format you like, even if it's not modern, you can enjoy yourself.
Absolutely.
But I'm going to thank everyone for tuning in again for what has been almost a little over a month now of our strange podcast rants, and we will try to be back next week.
Yep. Everybody have a good night, and thank you for watching.
All right. See ya.
See ya.